All right, let's get right into it. We're talking about an event that wasn't just big, it was a political, social, and economic earthquake, one that erupted in 1917 and completely changed the entire course of the 20th century. That's right, we're diving into the Russian Revolution.
And you know, that is no exaggeration. You really can't understand modern history without getting a handle on what happened here. Think about it. A royal dynasty that had ruled for centuries? Gone. And in its place, a radical new kind of government the world had literally never seen before.
So, how are we going to tackle this massive topic? Well, we've broken it down into 5 key parts. First, we'll look at the empire on the brink of collapse. Then, the People's Revolution itself. After that, we'll see how Lenin seized power, explore how the new state was forged, and finish with the rise of Stalin's iron fist.
Okay, so let's set the stage. Picture this. It's the beginning of 1917. The Russian Empire is this massive, sprawling power, and the Roman house have been in charge for over 300 years. But honestly, the whole thing was a house of cards, just about ready to come tumbling down. So what was the final push? Well, it really boiled down to 3 huge problems. First, World War I. For Russia, it was an absolute catastrophe. We're talking devastating losses and a staggering death toll that made Tsar Nicholas look completely incompetent. Second, the economy was in shambles. Food was running out, and people were literally starving. And third, the Tsar and his German-born wife, the Tsarina. To put it mildly, nobody liked them. They were seen as completely disconnected from what was really happening to their people.
And that really gets to the heart of the issue. You know, the whole social structure was a powder keg. You had this tiny, incredibly wealthy nobility living in luxury, and then this enormous sea of impoverished peasants and workers with practically nothing. It was an absolute recipe for disaster, just waiting for a match to be lit.
And in 1917, that match was definitely lit. Now here's something that's super important to remember, because a lot of people get this mixed up. We're not talking about just one revolution here. Nope, there were actually 2 completely different revolutions in 1917. And just look at how fast everything happened. In February, it all kicks off with a spontaneous uprising in the capital, Petrograd. It's so chaotic, so massive, that the Tsar is forced to abdicate. Just like that, he's gone. Then, boom, April, Vladimir Lenin shows up, back from exile. And by October, his Bolshevik party is taking over the whole show in a carefully planned coup. Okay, so this is the key difference you gotta get. The February Revolution, that was a grassroots explosion. Spontaneous, leaderless, just people who were completely fed up. It created a shaky, sort of democratic government. But the October Revolution, totally different beast. That was a planned, strategic takeover by one small, highly organized party, the Bolsheviks. And they had one very clear goal, a communist state.
You know, for a little while there, right after the Tsar was gone, there was this incredible sense of hope. It was electric. This new provisional government comes in, and they're promising all this great stuff. A free press, the right to protest, letting political exiles come home. It really felt like Russia was stepping into a brand new, brighter future.
But it wasn't that simple. This is where it gets really tricky. Because at the exact same time, you had these other groups popping up called the Soviets. These are basically popular councils of workers and soldiers, and they had real power. They had their own militias. So you ended up with this super weird, super tense situation with 2 governments trying to run the country at once, a dual power system. And you can probably guess that's not exactly a recipe for stability.
And of course, all this chaos, it was the perfect opening for someone like Vladimir Lenin. He and his Bolshevik party, they looked at this mess and saw a golden opportunity. They started speaking directly to the people who were still angry, promising them everything the official government was failing to deliver. And the new government made one massive, fatal mistake. They stayed in World War I. Now, why on earth would they do that? Well, their allies, like Britain and France, were putting a ton of pressure on them. But for the Russian people, it was a disaster. Soldiers were deserting, people at home were starving, they were just desperate for peace. By staying in the war, the government completely lost the support of the people. Lenin, on the other hand, was a political master. He knew exactly what to promise. The second his Bolsheviks took over, he got up and announced 3 simple things. 1, peace, immediately. We're out of the war. 2, land. It's going to the peasants. And 3, a new government run by the Soviets, the People's Councils. It was simple, it was powerful, and it was exactly what everyone wanted to hear. But here comes the real test. The Bolsheviks actually held an election for a new democratic assembly to write a new constitution. And get this, they lost. Lenin's party did not get the majority of the votes.
So think about that for a second. What do you do when you've just led a people's revolution, but the people don't actually vote for you? The answer? He just ignored the results. He sent in the military and shut the whole thing down after just one day. And that was it. That was the moment any hope for a democratic Russia was snuffed out. The road was now wide open for a one-party dictatorship.
Okay, so grabbing power is one thing, but holding on to it? That's a whole different ballgame. The Bolsheviks were surrounded by enemies, and they were about to show the world just how ruthless they could be to keep control and build their new state.
And their number one tool for this was a new organization called the Cheka. This was the very first Soviet secret police. And their job was simple and terrifying. Find and destroy anyone who disagreed with the new government. We're talking mass arrests, torture, executions on the spot, no questions asked.
This quickly ballooned into something known as the Red Terror. And this wasn't just about fighting a war. This was about terrorizing your own population into submission. Anyone, and I mean anyone, who is even suspected of being an enemy could be rounded up. Former nobles, other socialists, workers who went on strike, it didn't matter. They were all targets.
Pretty soon, the whole country just exploded into a brutal civil war. On one side, you've got the Bolsheviks' Red Army, which was incredibly well organized by Leon Trotsky, and fighting them was the White Army. But the Whites weren't really a single army. It was a messy mix of different groups who all hated the Bolsheviks but couldn't agree on much else. That division was fatal. The united and ruthless Red Army crushed them.
But that victory came at an unbelievable price. Years of revolution and war had completely destroyed the country. And what followed was one of the worst famines in modern history. An estimated 5 million people starved to death. Just think about that. A revolution that started with the promise of bread ended in unimaginable starvation.
So, the Civil War is over, the Bolsheviks have won, and they've created the Soviet Union, the USSR. But the new country is fragile, and its leader, Lenin, is fading. A series of strokes leaves him completely sidelined, and with the founder of the state out of the picture, a power vacuum opens up. The big question was, who's next? And there were two main contenders. On one side, you have Leon Trotsky. He's the brilliant thinker, the war hero, who built the Red Army. He seemed like the obvious choice. And on the other side, Joseph Stalin, a guy no one really paid much attention to. He wasn't a great speaker or a brilliant theorist, he was a bureaucrat. But while everyone else was arguing about big ideas, Stalin was quietly, methodically putting his own people into every important job in the government. He was playing the long game.
And it worked. When Lenin died in 1924, Stalin made his move. He took complete control. He kicked Trotsky out of the country and years later even had him assassinated. Stalin then built one of the most brutal totalitarian regimes in history, and through sheer force and terror, he forged the USSR into a global superpower.
Which brings us to the big final question, and it's one worth thinking about. This whole thing started with people desperate for freedom, crying out against a single all-powerful ruler. But when all the dust settled, did they just end up replacing one emperor with an even more ruthless dictator? That's the tragic irony of the Russian Revolution, and it's something people are still grappling with today.